Happening now. We want to welcome our viewers from across the United States and around the world. This is the EdTech Situation Room. Good morning, good day, good evening. This is EdTech Situation Room, episode number 209 for February 17th, 2021. My name is Jason Neiffer, and I am the Assistant Director and Curriculum Director of the Montana Digital Academy, Montana State Virtual School located in the fabulous University of Montana campus right here in snowy and cold Missoula, Montana. But tonight, I can't claim to be the cold capital of this podcast because I'm talking to Dr. Wes Fryer. Good evening, Wes Fryer. How cold is it tonight in your neck of the woods?
It's a heat wave. It's 18 degrees. We got up to 21, but we were down below zero, which has, I don't know that that's ever happened since we've lived here since 2006. And we have a foot of snow on the ground that has been dumped in a couple stacks. But I am the technology innovation and the technology integration and innovation specialist at the Cassidy School, teaching 5th and 6th grade media literacy. And we have actually had a bit of a midwinter break, but we had a remote day prior to that, and then snow day, Tuesday, and today's remote. And they just emailed that we're going to be remote again. So it's crazy, but it's a great time to not live in Texas, as we may talk about a little bit in the show. Although there's some technology connections to that as well as politics. What are we going to do here tonight, Jason? What are we going to be talking about?
Well, we might actually talk about the weather a couple of times here tonight, but otherwise we will talk about technology and its many splendors, especially shot through the prism of education. And every week we take articles ripped from the headlines that are related to tech and talk about what impact they may have on K-12 education. Tonight's topics will include a lot of Google news, some privacy and security news, Apple news, some connectivity information, the broad category that we talk about called the tech correction, which is the seemingly interesting pullback away from technologies, especially things like social media, some information about podcasting, a little Snowmageddon update, and of course, we will end tonight's episode with our Geeks of the Week. Dr. Fryer, where would you like to start this evening?
Oh gosh, do you want to jump in? Let's jump into the Google news. The Google news is probably going to take a lot. So I'll start just by saying that today was the Learning with Google event, which I think we had mentioned on the show a few weeks ago and is ongoing for different regions. I got to watch about the first 30 minutes of it. My big takeaway, and I actually, maybe that'll be my geek of the week, but I to it now. But anyway, I'll put it in the links. I made a little sketch note of the first 30 minutes of this. And my big takeaway is that, hey, Google is cashing in on the education market. I have mentioned, we've talked before on the show kind of about a sense of this, like, there seems to be a seismic change in the educational approach of Google. The little sketch note that I made, which I'll drop here into the live chat, I broke down, or just kind of tried to capture the level. So Google is still going to be offering a free tier of what they're now calling Google Workspace for Education. And they're, proud to continue offering that for free, but they're going to be, I think, starting in April, 3 paid Google upgrade options. And they're not really all building on each other. The first one's this EDU standard, which I would say, is going to be essential for security and investigation. So we've had that this last year, and our IT department, I know, has benefited from that. That's $3 per student per year. Then there's a teaching and learning upgrade, which I think it's all been in one tier right now. That it's like enterprise. I'm not exactly sure because I'm not, signing off on any bills anymore in our school. But the teaching and learning upgrade has like recorded Google Meets, breakout rooms, the unlimited originality reports, and then that's $4 per license per month, which I think that may be by teacher. And then Education Plus is $5 per student per year, and that's really the EDU standard. But then you get this like larger live stream quota, institutional drive, search, and this is the big one, though, that I'm interested in, sync to Google Classroom to its SIS. And I know you put into the chat, and I'll drop it in, an article about Google Classroom updates, and maybe you can say a little more about that. But the fact that they are really moving to be an LMS. And the number that was so big from this today was a year ago, they had 40 million worldwide users of G Suite for Education. Today, that number is 150 million teachers and students. And then someone else said 170 million. I don't know if that included enterprise users or what that 170, but like that's a huge jump. So still love the Googles, fantastic, but wow, we've really, I think, seen a fundamental pivot here in, time to cash in on the educational market. Do you think, am I right or wrong, sir?
I think you're absolutely right. And, I had only heard some of the announcements as they'd been pinged to me on Twitter today. Shout out to Simon Miller, my friend, in Idaho, upstate Idaho, as he likes to call it, who told me about the changes to Google Classroom. We'll talk about in a moment. But I will tell you that as the more I'm getting into this, the more I've read about this is going to be a pretty big change to the way I do business in regards to Google services. And the free fundamentals is a perfectly good service that we will probably stick with, but the $3 per student per year does add a relatively significant cost. It's probably $10,000, $12,000, $15,000 a year, but there are some, you were right that the security piece I think is kind of a big deal, and so we will take a really close look at this. To see, kind of what direction we want to go into. I think part of the complication for me personally is that, our student body is not a full-time student body. All the students we serve in context of my day job at Montana State Virtual School are part-time with us and maintain a separate local email account. And we're gonna have to talk about, the merits of having those external tools available to students and what that ultimately means for us. But, I am super interested in, what will be compromised in the free version in order to, offer these new paid tiers. But we talked about and kind of guesstimated in the past 6 months or so, especially with the rebranding towards Workspace, and they started to create new tiers that you could buy into, that at some point the free version would become less and less and less functional until it, in essence, becomes almost mandatory for a real implementation of the program to then buy up into one of the higher tiers. And I just noticed that as an example of this, I think with everyone, they're going to start pulling back storage, that they're going to go from, this is quoting their blog, Google has traditionally offered unlimited storage to qualifying schools and universities for free. However, as we've grown to serve more schools and universities each year, storage consumption has also rapidly accelerated. Storage is not being consumed equitably across nor within institutions. School leaders often don't have the tools they need to manage this. And to support schools, they're going to put new pooled storage models and give more tools to IT folks to help manage that storage.
Which article are you reading that one from? Do you remember the title of that one?
Yeah, it's called Google Workplace. No, more options for learning with Google Workspace for Education. This is from the Google blog.
Okay. Do we have that one on our list?
I think it's the top one on there, and if it's not, I will throw the link in. But the thing that's interesting about that is that, and I'll give you an example of this. Currently, I have 17 terabytes. I myself have 17 terabytes stored in my work account, and it's because all of our archived classes we've maintained on off-prem in Google Cloud Storage. Now we've oversaved that over time, just because we were leery about getting rid of information and data as we've tried to figure out where we're going with things. But even though I am obviously a massive size user here, and that's going to be extraordinary, we don't even come close to using the amount of storage they're going to allow pooled for each individual institution. And the new storage model provides schools and universities with 100 terabyte of pooled cloud storage. And so even though I could probably scale back easily to, maybe a terabyte or lower of storage. Even with my count using 17, we're not even going to come close to 100 terabytes. And so I think that's something to keep in mind over time as well.
Well, here's something I would just want to throw out there. Two couple of thoughts. Number one, like, could any other company handle a jump of what we're talking about in the last year? I mean, from 40 million to 150 million users. We talked on the show a few weeks ago about this like little blip in Classroom that went down just not for very long. But that's not one of the core G Suite applications, which I think we commented that's interesting because for schools at this point, it certainly would be considered a core application. That article that we've got at the top is called "A Peek at What's Next for Google Classroom," and one of the things they talk about, like this is paragraph 3. This is hugely important because at the very first time that I heard Google rolling out Classroom, ISTE, other kinds of things, like they explicitly said, this is not a learning management system. This is not an LMS. Yep. So paragraph 3, quote, "While we didn't set out to create an LMS, Classroom is committed to meeting the evolving needs of schools. We'll continue to put the people who use our products first and listen to your feedback to us your top priorities, and we'll always make sure Classroom retains its simplicity and ease of use that's made it so helpful to teachers, students, and school leaders around the world." Now, what's not explicitly said there is that a ton of those 150 million users of Google Education, whether we're going to call it Workspace or G Suite or whatever, are using Classroom as their LMS. I would love to see those statistics. This entire hour and a half, I think, will be available on demand in 2 days on February 19th. And I'm going to go ahead and watch the rest of it. I just got to catch the first 30 minutes. But Google Classroom is not an LMS. It's not a full LMS, but it is what a lot of schools have used. Tomorrow, I'm actually giving a webinar. We had 420 people registered as of this morning to teachers in Albania, and that the professional development group that I'm doing this webinar for is a free webinar. They said that WhatsApp groups have been the main way they've been staying in contact with their students because they don't have G Suite and Google accounts and LMSs and things like that. So, when you think about the global reach of Google, the number of users, I will say that I think it's just astounding and wonderful that Google has met the demand. And we really didn't see a blip in service over the pandemic and all of that. The other observation I'll have, and I don't have his name, is that in the presentation today, I think he may have been the 4th speaker. He was one of the original people in charge of search at Google. And when you talk about search, that is the core, right? That's what, Google, it started it with their bread and butter, and of course advertising got added, but search is the core of the business. And so the fact that this gentleman, whose name I need to get in anyway, I don't know that I had heard of him before, but he's now leading Sundar Pichai, who's the CEO of Google, did the kickoff initial talk and then, introduced. And this early Googler is now leading the Google Workspaces for EDU, which is going to take a while to start having that roll off your tongue. But that is anyway, it's a significant commitment, and it's a pivoted, shifted commitment. But we've said before, companies have to turn a profit. I mean, if you are a company, you have to find a way to keep the lights on. I'm not saying Google is at risk of having the lights go off, but it would be interesting to know what their outlay, and I'm sure this is what happened. I don't know. This is just Wes's guess. But you increase users from 40 million to 150 million. And when you're talking about, Jason, all that storage, and they're saying it's not equitable. I mean, think about it. I'm recording every single meeting that I'm having, but we haven't actually been remote that much. There's schools that have been remote the entire year. And you think about the amount of storage, et cetera. I think Google just had to take a very hard look at what they were doing and where the money was flowing. And they have made some big adjustments.
Yep, absolutely. And the other thing I would also note too is that there has been a subtle change over time as companies that were essentially advertising companies, right? Like, and that's what we sometimes misunderstand about Google. It is a search company to start with, but the way they made their money was through advertising, right? And advertising, it's not going away, but it's certainly sparking more criticism than almost any other revenue generation strategy that a .com, to use, I guess, a more dated term, might utilize. And as data is going to become less valuable, as more people are cognizant about their privacy, the debate that we've been talking about in the last several weeks on the podcast about what Apple is doing now to highlight when particular apps are asking for more information than you're comfortable giving, that's going to mean that those revenue sources are going to dry up at some point, and the only option is then to charge for the service. This has been happening on the personal side already. It's what sparked this discussion on our podcast about this, but it's just happening in education as it is as much as everywhere else. And, to give just a really slim example of this, because I was curious, and I don't know, I can't remember how long ago this was, a year and a half ago. It was Christmas time. I was at my parents' house in Great Falls. I tend to do things like, surf random stuff when I'm on holiday that's not education related. And I knew there had been a trend of people selling unlimited Google accounts on eBay for $1, $6, $10. And I bought one because I was just curious to find out what that was, right? And so I think I spent $1 at the time, and I was offered an account from the Community College of San Francisco. I was given a username and password. I changed the password right away to make sure it wasn't hacked, and I never used it for anything. It was $1 I spent to amuse myself for an hour, and it lasted about 8 months before it was shut down, but I had access to the entire free education account from the Community College for San Francisco. The reason why I'm mentioning that is because I had seen references to that online, that people were backing up terabytes of local information. If they were smart, they were also encrypting that before it went off, because as a G Suite administrator, you would know that you have access to anything in anyone's Google Drive. That's part of the e-discovery process, is that you have access to those pieces. But I know for a fact that people were data hoarding on free accounts that some part-time sub-administrator for various institutions were doing. I would check in with the account every month or two to see it was still going. It lasted about 8 or 9 months before it was shut down. But you can even today go on to Google or eBay and find a free accounts that people are selling.
And that's not the dark web. eBay is not the dark web. So.
No, it's not. Yeah, and I'm sure there are plenty of interesting things in the dark web, but it's no doubt in my mind that people were abusing that storage. It reminds me that a couple years back, when OneDrive first launched, OneDrive was an unlimited drive service to start with. It for I think almost 3 or 4 months, until people started putting extraordinary amounts of backup information on their OneDrives. In fact, if I remember correctly, even Evernote, in the way that it offered unlimited storage at one point for relatively inexpensive paid accounts, people figured out how to hoard data on those accounts before they got rid of the unlimited posture. So I appreciate the fact that Google's waited this long to start limiting that unlimited storage space, right? But I guess I'm definitely not surprised that this has happened.
Now, I understand you're a little excited about the rich text features, which we can talk about. The paragraph I will read and I'm most interested in says, subtitles, set up classes in advance with SIS roster syncing coming later this year. Provisioning classes for an entire school system can be time-consuming later this year. Admins using Education Plus will be able to create classes and populate and sync rosters directly to Classroom from their student information system. And that is a very specific thing that I'm going to be interested to find out if our current SIS vendor, which is not one that just, millions of anyway, whatever, thousands. I don't know. That maybe they do have thousands of customers. I don't know how many customers, but it's not like one of the main ones that public K-12 are using. And I'm really going to be interested in whether or not they're going to do that, because one of the challenges, is that our student information system has a very underpowered LMS that was basically bought from another company in 2015 and hasn't been updated a whole lot. Google Classroom offers a lot better features, and I've tried to just not use Google Classroom for a trimester, and it wasn't pretty. But the double entry is a pain, and synchronization with SIS is a big deal. So does the rich text aspects of their announcement excite you or interest you?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I love Google Classroom for its simplicity. As a an individual that does work in distance learning, I also know it's not an LMS. Although we have teachers occasionally try to pitch to us that they would prefer to teach their class that way, but it is missing some key features. And even with today's announcements, it's not quite as full featured of a learning management system as Moodle or Canvas or Brightspace or Blackboard, or even there's dozens of B and C tier LMSs that are used fairly widely in both corporate and educational implementations, but it's getting closer. My context of using Google Classroom is that we use it as a teacher system at MTDA for what we call accountability and checklists. A lot of what we do to put out distance learning classes requires some technical setup that we rely on our teachers to do, and that technical setup piece is a checklist is the best way to do that. There's a great book called The Checklist Manifesto that I'm a big believer in, and it talks about the key when you want consistency over a large number of people. The best way to do that is a checklist. Checklist is also a great assessment strategy too, for the exact same reason. But we use checklist as part of our accountability strategy at the Digital Academy. And I'll admit, I like underlining, highlighting. I'm a big fan of the notion of kind of marking up a text to draw the eye to the most important things, knowing that a lot of busy people will scan things and maybe miss things if they're not reading for detail. So that's something that's super exciting to me. There's also obviously connecting to an SIS is a great step forward. It makes that a more legitimate learning management system option. And then I'm not entirely sure if I understand this one, but they announced it as use your favorite EdTech tools and content within Classroom coming later this year. I think that you have to have the Education Plus or Teaching and Learning upgrades. You have to do a paid tier for this. But Google or Classroom add-ons will allow teachers to choose their favorite EdTech tools and content from a marketplace and assign it to students directly in Classroom, all without extra logins, which seems to me that kind of like LTI integration, the IMS Global LTI standard, which allows for an LMS to feed into allow content companies to feed information into your learning management system with a single sign-on piece. It's a way we access a lot of our vendors' content at the Digital Academy. It might be close to that. I hope it's a more open system, though, and that the company doesn't have to just get something through a Google marketplace. I would prefer if they had straight up LTI integration. That would actually make it a very interesting prospect to me. But interesting stuff.
And that says tools and content. We continue to use, and I would foresee us continuing to use Seesaw with our elementary as well as our primary, kiddos and teachers. And so that one of the best things about Seesaw is being able to have access to this library of activities that teachers have created and shared, not only within your school or district, but it can be throughout the entire Seesaw community. And I think they've actually gotten a little more restrictive. It used to be that anybody could, submit things globally, and the content and the amount. In fact, Seesaw is another company. Like, it'd be great to know the statistics because they have a free tier as well. And I'm sure that explosion during the pandemic is just. I've heard a few things. It's been incredible. But anyway, that ability to have teacher created materials, and this isn't teachers pay teachers, by the way. This is free stuff that teachers are giving. But this marketplace does sound a lot like, not only apps that you can plug in that are going to give you quizzing, like teaching Spanish, as I did the first semester, using Quizlet, using, Kahoot, using other kinds of platforms that help with vocabulary and things like that. Being able to plug that in natively sounds more LMS-y, but the content piece, thinking about curriculum, I know that PBS, and they were pushing this a bit right when we started the, lockdown and the emergency remote learning, has these modules that you can just immediately, grab and bring into Classroom. So it'll be interesting to see if that's what they're going to offer up to textbook publishers, and also how that, might interface with open source materials and things like that, as far as being able to grab an open source algebra, curriculum and textbook or
Yeah.
something like that, and then have modules and things like that you can bring right in. So there's a lot of important announcements here. I think the good news overall is that Google has risen to the challenge. As you point out, I agree that there's been abuses of the system, and they've, for different reasons that we may not fully know, but surely it has a lot to do with money, and probably just the need to have some limits on what they were giving away. They are having to change some of the rules of the game, and I'm sure that's going to probably upset some people. But the fact that you can still have this free tier is a good thing, right? If they were going away from that, that would be a pretty big fundamental departure from kind of the promise of what they've had. These additional things, maybe not the storage piece, because that's kind of been part of the deal as well, but certainly the recording with Mead, and these new add-ons of the assignment. It's not called assignment checker, but anyway, there's a lot of additional things that they have put on here, and I think it's great to see Google dynamically responding to the needs and meeting the needs, right? I mean, Google Classroom didn't go down during the pandemic, during a year where they saw more than exponential growth. Going from 40 million to 150 million is not just doubling. That's actually more than tripling. That is crazy. So thankfully, there's a lot of smart folks, and they got a lot of servers at Google to handle that demand. But obviously, they needed to make some changes, and it's going to be important. But I think also good to track these changes and improvements to service. But we're going to have to start paying. I think that's going to be. You're probably not going to want to remain on the free tier as an enterprise user of these tools. Yep. I don't think you're going to want to.
Absolutely. And then the other thing I would also note is that, kind of related to this, that and I can't remember IDC released these market statistics, but 9 to 5 Mac reported today as well that Mac market share did increase. It grew significantly last year, going from 5.8% to 7.7%. That's a huge increase for Mac's market share in sales, but it is paled in comparison to the growth increase by Chromebooks. The Chromebook sales last year, they saw a 400% increase in Chromebook sales, seeing the market share rise from 5.3% in quarter one to a massive 14.4% by the end of the year, close twice the share of Mac OS. And the reason why that's interesting, it's not only, was the accelerated, obviously, adoption of Chromebooks, and obviously schools are going to be the primary reason why that was the case, but additionally, it's the first time that Windows has dropped below 80% in decades, really. Because Apple's really never had that huge of a share going back to their early competitive days against Microsoft. More importantly, I would also note that it does increase the wisdom of the decision for Microsoft to move away from selling operating systems and hardware, and more towards platforms that are usable across really all of the genres of these particular platforms, is what I'm trying to say. So,
hey, well, let's segue to a security article, which I have I've just scanned here that you've put in, but has huge implications for us, and that is about LastPass. So, as listeners of the podcast will know, Jason and I are enthusiastic advocates of password managers in various flavors, to include LastPass as well as 1Password. There's other choices, of course. We have been recommending, but not requiring, our teachers to use a password manager, and we've recommended LastPass. Well, guess what? LastPass, starting March 16th, is no longer going to give you free access to your passwords on both your computer and your device, your smartphone or your tablet. Man, that is a huge bummer. And again, it points to a company, and whether this was something that they strategized all along, I mean, we'll probably never know, but, reaching a point where I guess they can't continue to provide that level of free service. And Frankly, that very well could convince me, or not just convince, it may twist my arm. I have hundreds of passwords in LastPass because that was where I chose to put all of my school passwords. And I don't know. I'll have to think about this, but if I was going to choose a platform, I'm going to choose the laptop. It's interesting because with continuity, if you have that turned on with your Mac, you can copy something logged into the same Apple ID on your iPhone and your Mac, and boom, it can be right over on your Mac. So that's not going to help going to a different computer. I don't have that happen that often. I mean, I'm in the habit now of using 30-character random passwords, and so those are kind of painful to type when you have to. And I've had to do that a few times, but I'm thinking with LastPass, I'm probably just going to say, give me the computer version. I won't need the iOS or tablet version. And then on the rare occasion when I need to do that, I could use the continuity feature of my computer and phone and just, move the password that way. So your thoughts about this one?
Well, I started paying for LastPass. I bought it on a Black Friday deal in November of 2020. And part of it's because I'd been recommending it for 10 years. And I literally have years and years and years and years of password cruft. In fact, the other day noticed I do every 2 or 3 month review of my LastPass list. And noticed that there were some sites that had been down, like hadn't been around for 4 or 5 years that I'd still maintained passwords for. The reason why I moved towards the paid tier was because I've been lately trying to pay for services that I find value to, in part because I want them to continue to exist in the long term. But I think it's related to the Google discussion. I think the free internet might be at risk here. And I think that we're going to more and more be challenged to find a way to provide financial support for tools that we use, because I don't think advertising is going to be enough. Now, LastPass didn't have an advertising piece. I think it was a freemium model, and they hoped you would upgrade. And for the record, I was a power user of LastPass, and it took me until November, so years and years after starting to use the tool, to pay for it. So the freebie model only worked in a minor way for me, but I think that there is definitely some merit into finding which tools work best for you and then utilizing it right in its most powerful way, and then paying for that service.
There's another security article you put down there from ZDNet. Do you want to pick that one up?
Yeah, this one is super interesting. So I had not heard of this happening until I saw the ZDNet article on it. But a couple weeks back, the cybersecurity firm Malwarebytes, which is a very popular piece of software for getting malware off of a desktop PC, had noted that an Android app called Barcode Scanner, right? Which, it sounds like an interesting utility app. The Barcode Scanner had been purchased by another company, right? So the app literally changed hands from one company to another. And then the new company apparently purchased that for the purpose of pushing malware onto computers. Onto your Android devices. And the idea here is that they purchased it, it changed hands, they added in something called Trojan hidden ads is the name of the what ZDNet called nuisanceware, right? And then it started popping up ads at random times on your phone. And I've actually seen something like this at play before. A couple of years back had a family member ask me for some assistance on their Android phone, and I discovered that this particular individual, and full disclosure, it's my dad, he had downloaded a number of solitaire games on his phone. And one of them had some malware on it that was, this nuisanceware. And so random ads would pop up at strange times, middle phone calls, surfing on Chrome. And, we were able to get rid of it. It was no big deal. But in this particular case, none of the users of this app certainly were wanting malware. They also, the original app that they had been using had worked fine for years. Obviously, the company had no comment about this. But the point that is super interesting is that this could be a new strategy, right, for getting bad stuff on your phone. Like you don't have to you yourself try to get an app into the Play Store that's got malware in it, especially since I would assume that that's one of the things they check for new app developers is to make sure your app's in the up and up. You can just buy an app with an existing user base and then push a piece of malware into it as part of an update. So pretty gross.
Wow. All right. What category would you like to tackle next, sir?
Well, let me do one more that's kind of in this neighborhood. This is also from today's ZDNet. Tracker pixels in email are now an endemic privacy concern. And this article was from Charlie Osborne. And it talks about something that I guess everyone knew. I thought everyone knew about, but perhaps you didn't. And there's a thing called, there's sometimes called tracker pixels. And the reason why they're called a pixel is because they're oftentimes an image. They could be as small as 1 pixel by 1 pixel. And they oftentimes are a light colored, white or beige or gray, so that you wouldn't notice it anyways. But what happens when there is a really any kind of tracking anything in an email is that when you open up the email, it's going to display that pixel to you, right? But they have to get that from a server somewhere, right? So the idea is that your email client pings the server and says, please send me this image, right? But when it does that, it can tell an awful lot about you, including how you're opening the email, whether you're on a phone or a desktop, whether you're on iOS or Android, whether you're a Mac or PC, you're opening on Firefox, Chrome, or Edge, or you're one of the 3 people still using Opera. Whatever you decide to do, it will track all that information about you. It will also likely track your IP address, right? Because, your computer where you're sitting at has to ask for this information. If you're not using a VPN, it would be able to then tell, where you're located at. And in the case of if I'm at work, for example, they could narrow it down to the University of Montana campus because the University of Montana has its own IP address of which all of its traffic is broadcast. And a lot of people are apparently kind of sketched out by this because, it does tell a lot about you. But the reason why I'm mentioning this is because I guess I thought this was broader knowledge, because going back 25 years, one of the reasons, 25 years, probably a little much, 20 years, one of the reasons why, spam email is such a problem is because if you open up a spam message and there's an image in it, they could use essentially tracking on that image to say that you opened the email, which means they know it's a legitimate email address. You also probably note that in a lot of email systems, I see this more in Outlook than I do in Gmail, but I know it happens in Gmail. Oftentimes they will block images from being shown on an email it thinks is sketchy because they want you to not give away personal information like your physical location IP address wise through that pixel. But I guess there are email clients you can download with signature software in it that add a tracking pixel so you can tell the number of times an email was opened. If you use any variety of marketing email software, MailChimp, Constant Contact, Vertical Response, it has tracking in it. I use it all the time. We use that data all the time when we send out facilitator emails as part of my program to help track when perhaps an announcement email is getting redirected regularly to spam, or maybe it's not making it to an end user at all, because we use the tracking pixels to find out when emails were open to help people get access to messaging that they need. So I guess I'd start with Wes. You're a pretty tech savvy guy. Did you know about the existence of these tracking pixels?
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, I think the first time I saw Google say, click here to display images, I was like, what is that? Why would they do that? And then became aware of that tracking. So it's cool when you use MailChimp or some of these programs to, oh, look how many people open my message. But, it's like some other things with statistics, podcast statistics, maybe. I don't know if that's the right analogy or metaphor, but, there's a lot of people who aren't going to be, who may be looking, but they are blocking the tracking pixels. But yeah, I knew that this was an issue. And this, gets to what we've talked about, frequently on the show very recently, that, the next stable version of Google Chrome is going to block third-party trackers. Apple has taken pretty aggressive moves to try and, limit the surveillance capitalism, at least the opacity and the concealment of, here's all the ways we're using your data, here's all the ways we're tracking you. They're trying to make there to be a little bit greater visibility and transparency with that in terms of what they're requiring developers to do for their apps. So yes, I was aware that this was an issue, and it's going to be interesting. It's not the right word, but maybe it is, to see how the market moves with this, right? Because marketing and data collection, these are huge, huge businesses. And so the push, and we can call this the tech correction, the Netflix documentary, The Social Dilemma, is, encouraging, trying to push society to limit the broad, invasive powers and abilities that tech companies have for a variety of reasons, to be able to track our every move and then try to nudge us, or have it's pay to nudge. It's run your ad to either try to get somebody to buy a product, or feel a certain way about a political candidate, or whatever, some kind of an issue. So I don't. Does the article suggest a solution to this, or what's, other than like the blocking images within your email? Is there anything else we can really do about it?
Well, I think I think part of the idea here is just awareness, but the article also talks about how there's increasing regulation, and of course, the place to do this is Europe, right? The GDPR, which is a very wide-reaching privacy or set of privacy standards in Europe. The GDPR demands that organizations tell recipients of email that there is tracking pixels encased in the email itself, and part of the problem is that like if you open the email, it's already too late, right? Like, that may be part of it. I could see a scenario where we may get to a point where you might even have to opt into some things to even open an email. I mean, that seems a little far-fetched, but if this is of concern of people, I could certainly understand where we might start developing some standards around it. But I guess the one thing I would say is that, for better or for worse, email has had a lot of longevity over time, right? It's the one social networking tool that, it does mimic traditional messaging, right? Like it has an analog in that, we used to mail things to each other, or stick them in interoffice mail. Email has largely replaced that, but it also hasn't been accused of some of the terrible things that social media has been accused of, right? So I think there's probably going to be a middle ground there too. I guess the larger point that I keep thinking about is that there's a reckoning coming. And that a lot of these technologies that allow for things like targeted marketing just may not be a reality in the relatively near future.
Or they need to be rolled back. So
yep,
in some ways. All right. Well, let's talk tech correction. Let's talk Australia a little bit. You had placed several articles into our show notes, which, by the way, you can access at edtechsr.com/links. And you got several that I had seen. So this first one is the Verge article. Facebook will block Australian users and publishers from sharing news links in response to a new bill. We have talked on the show the last couple of weeks, I think, more about Google and this threat. But from what I understand, the news publishers are mad that they've lost all kinds of revenue, and they think that companies like Google with search and the AMP thing, way that Google will, take off some ads and give you a cleaner Googleized version of an article. And then Facebook also, the legislature has been proposing to make these companies pay. Evidently, there was some kind of a settlement that Google had, but Facebook, there was another article I think I read that talked about, has taken the nuclear option. And so they are now actually blocking news articles from Facebook from being shared on the number one social media platform in the world, certainly for adults. So your thoughts?
Well, Google initially said they thought they might need to pull out of Australia, and the whole notion behind that is really mind blowing, right? What does it look like for Google to pull out of a country the size of Australia, right? Major. And of course, one of my Android devices just thought I was talking to it. Massive notion of doing that. I can't wrap my brain around it, right? Of what that might look like. But they have subsequently started negotiating some kind of financial arrangement with news organizations in Australia. But Facebook has decided that they just won't allow posting at all. And there's actually a matrix about what this looks like. But I, as an international user tonight, tried to post an Australian broadcasting article on my Facebook feed just to see what it did, right? And it came up with an error message. So this is already implemented, right? So I'm an American. I'm trying to post an Australian news story, and it said something went wrong. We're working on it or getting it fixed as soon as we can. So it's literally...
So it's not just that you, as an Australian user, if you were geographically and physically in Australia, would have it blocked. Even here, as a United States user of Facebook, because that's an Australian news link, it's blocked?
Yes. Yep. Wow. And I have no Australian friends on Facebook, at least not that I know of. I used to have a friend that lived in New Zealand, but as an international user, you can't post, and even Australian publishers can't post their own wares on Facebook because they're just said we're done, right? Like we can't participate in this. And Wes, you talked me into a couple weeks back why this is a big deal for Google from the standpoint of if they're pulling information off the website and taking the ads off of it, that does diminish an economic possibility for that article, right? To help fund the journalism that does that. But Facebook, I mean, they're just linking to it, right? Like, and Facebook was one of the so-called offenders that the government was really going after. But I would argue that for better or for worse, I would imagine that Facebook drives an awful lot of traffic to news websites, especially if you're posting just links and not huge parts of articles. And so I think this is, I think it's short-sighted, right? The Google one's a little different for me, but from Facebook standpoint, preventing discovery via those links, I think is pretty strange. And so again, I'm still trying to wrap my brain around what the end game looks like globally with this stuff. But it's super interesting so far that Facebook Australia is just like, we're not going to deal with it. You can't post news links. Sorry.
Shout out to Chris Betcher, who I just tweeted and copied you, Jason, who's a wonderful educational technology leader there. And I just said, hey, what do you think about this, Chris? What's your take? I think that the Australian legislators are sort of trying to fight the tide here. Maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think they're going to be able to get a pay-per-click or whatever from Facebook or Google. I mean, the web doesn't work that way. That's not the way hyperlinks work. That's a fundamental thing to say, I can link to you and I'm not going to need to pay you money. I mean, there's been questions and there's interesting things about deep links and people who've said, oh, you can't, deep link and you have to go to the front page, whatever. But the hyperlink is really a basic element of the internet. And I think that, we see this with Europe, and there's all kinds of things. We saw this with ebooks, and regulation is happening, and it is going to happen. But this big push to say every news link is going to generate money for the company that produced it, it seems crazy. So Rupert Murdoch's, media empire evidently is the one that is settled with Google, and they've got some kind of financial agreement. Money certainly passes hands here. Even we were talking on the show a few weeks ago or whatever, a while back about Firefox and just how much money, Firefox, Mozilla made because they were continuing to have Google as their default search engine. I mean, there's lots of money being, exchanging hands here. I will be interested to see if the EFF has chimed in on this and, some other, Cory Doctorow and some other folks, be interested to hear their take on this. But it just in general, it seems ridiculous. Like, I don't think that you can decide as a country, you're going to have to pay every one of our news organizations anytime there's a link on your website. I mean, what is this? I think that's Fruit Loop, Looney Tunes. So
Yeah.
I'm kind of wanting to say, yeah, good job, Facebook. Standing up to this, because it sounds like Google has settled and is paying some money, at least to Rupert Murdoch, but Facebook's not. And this is the demonstration effect is what they're going for here, right? Because if this is what they do, I mean, what country? Facebook is the web, by the way, in a number of countries. I mean, and I do not think this is good, but it has to do with contracts and cell phones and a whole bunch of things. But anyway, in certain countries, Facebook is the internet. I don't think that's the case in Australia, and I don't necessarily think that that's a good thing. But I'll actually use that as a segue to a rather weird article that I put under tech correction as well. I don't know if it fits exactly, but Nevada bill would allow tech companies to create governments. This is from AP News on February 3rd, and I actually heard about this from listening to a Twit podcast recently. So basically, Nevada has legalized gambling because it's not particularly a wonderful state in lots of areas to say, hey, let's move to Nevada. So that was part of the idea was, hey, if we legalize gambling and other activities, we can generate revenue and bring people to the state. Well, the governor has evidently suggested this. It hasn't become a bill, but it would allow a tech company that fits a certain profile and owns a certain number of acres to bypass county, municipal laws and all this, create schools and taxation and just do everything to form its own government. And in the Twit episode that was talking about this, they referenced, how maybe it was in the early days of Google, there was some joking about that, but it is not a joke that these tech companies and the amount of money that they have makes them more like nation states than companies. The amount of power they have, the amount of money they have is absolutely astounding. And so I would be really surprised if this happens. But wow, Nevada has done some kind of outlandish outlier things before to try to generate revenue. So is that gonna work? I don't know. It seems like a desperate measure, but it also, I think, shows how it is important for us to start treating technology companies differently. Okay, the mom and pop, dry cleaning shop down the street or whatever is just so different than these enormous tech companies that wield power that is maybe more challenging to see in the same way that you can see, factory, factory buildings or, acres of cars and huge car lots or whatever. It's not the material capital or whatever that you can see in the same way, but it's astounding. So would you move to a Facebook community, Jason, where all you had to do was wear their smartwatch and maybe you could live there for free in exchange for all the data you give them? I don't know how that would work.
Well, yeah, I mean, I guess I've become way more acutely aware of the power of data in the last, 12, 24 months. Whereas, like I used to say that I'm comfortable with sharing data if I could see a real benefit of it. I'm not entirely sure that that's still the case for me. And so while I understand people heading in that broader direction, I'm not entirely convinced yet that that's always the best thing to do,
Yeah. Here's one more that I put in that same category that is just kind of wild. And our daughter Rachel and I just rewatched Ready Player One. If you have not seen that, it's actually, as most movies are, a lot better book than the movie, but the movie's still pretty good. This is a Wired article from 2 days ago on February 15th. Billionaires see VR, virtual reality, as a way to avoid radical social change. Now, the article is primarily quoting a Joe Rogan podcast interview with the former CEO of, I think it's Oculus. And his name is Carmack, and John Carmack, former CTO of Oculus. and Doom co-creator. And he very callously talks about, well, everyone can't have a mansion. Everybody can't be Richard Branson and have, their own island in the Virgin Islands. But everybody might be able to just be in VR and live in whatever world they want to live in. And wow. I think we need to not give up on improving the face-to-face world for people. But that was I saw that article. My immediate train of thought was Ready Player One, because that Ready Player One is a sort of not dystopian, vision of the future. The movie moves the hero to Columbus, Ohio, where he actually is in Oklahoma City in the book. But anyway, like the vast majority of the world's population live in this virtual world that has been created, and we're a ways away from that, but it's interesting. And I don't know, they said plural billionaires, and maybe they were just talking about this one guy. Have you used an Oculus yet? I've got a couple students that have, and I've been talking, if we get to go face to face next week, I was talking to some of them about maybe bringing their units and doing a demo. Have you had a chance to do some demo work or even just play in VR yet, Jason?
The HoloLens was the Microsoft one, and I got an opportunity to utilize that one at ISTE San Antonio, I believe is where I took advantage of that one. And it was, a 20-minute demo as part of an EDU thing. I know some folks that have done the Oculus thing, and were super into it, thought it was super great. The thing I think is interesting is that, the cheap VR plays, right? So things like the Google, stick your phone in headset that I loved a lot. Like, it was interesting. It just didn't seem to have the staying power, where it seems like the Oculus plays that have obviously much more expensive hardware seem to be sticking around longer. And so while I, don't like it that, they're spendy and they take a pretty decent hardware to run, I still think there's some good VR stuff to come. It's just probably not going to be the cheap, stick a cell phone into, Google Cardboard that we thought it was going to be.
And then the article points out, it really is an issue of cost, right? It's so expensive now, and the processors, we still are going to continue to see, even if it's not Moore's law exactly, different reasons how the capabilities of devices are just going to continue to increase. But until they reach a price point, I saw in Walmart this week, I saw a 70-inch television for $685. 70-inch. That's an example where consumer market has continued and will continue to push price points down. And until we see that in the VR marketplace, then I don't think we're going to see anything that's going to be large impact. But it's pretty wild. One of the things I'd love to do is to see if our kids could design things, in Minecraft or even in Tinkercad, but probably in Minecraft, but then, be able to go into the world that they've created and interact with it in a 3D environment. We had, I worked with one of our teachers a couple years ago who did a Roman unit, and she had her students design different Roman structures in Tinkercad. And then we were able to export them as like STLs or whatever, and then import them into Minecraft. And that was cool, but that wasn't 3D. So anyway, if we start a gaming club at our school, shout out Zach Gilbert, we might do something like that. I think that would be phenomenally amazing to be in a virtual reality environment, but it's one that has been student created, not just created by, super smart, but professional tech people in Silicon Valley or somewhere else.
Absolutely. Okay, Wes, anything else you want to get in tonight, as we see we're quickly approaching the top of the hour?
Let's see. You want to take the podcasting article?
Yeah. I like the kind of where this is going. At some point, Wes and I keep talking about maybe, you look at these statistics closer than I do. Monetizing this podcast, does it make a ton of sense, in part because we do this to, mostly to be able to interact with each other once a week and talk through these issues and have an opportunity to read stuff that's impacting us professionally. And we know we have listeners out there because they contact us back often and let us know that they're listening and they like the show. But it's super interesting because now that everyone seems to have kind of come on board the podcast train, and there's all of these new providers and people are buying each other out, and everyone's got a podcast play and yada, yada, yada. iHeartMedia has purchased Triton Digital for $230 million. And they are an advertising platform that has most application in podcasting. They do other live pieces of audio broadcasting as well, right? Inserting ads dynamically into that content. But the reason why this article is interesting is not just because of the sales here and there. It's because there seems to be some energy around big media companies like iHeartMedia in finding ways to insert more advertising into your listening over time. So people don't have to rely on MailChimp ads anymore. There could actually be a dynamic way to insert ads that are targeted to you, but also could change over time and wouldn't be, dated based on when the time a podcast is published. I oftentimes will go listen to older episodes of podcasts that interest me as part of this process. So, obviously our monetization of our podcast is an ongoing conversation, but there seems to be additional platforms available for doing so. It's just super interesting that this is happening while at the same time there seems to be such pushback against directed advertising towards users.
Well, sir, I think we've reached the top of the hour.
Well, shall we do our Geeks of the Week?
Let's do it.
Okay, the one I wanted to share was a super interesting article that I saw in today's Verge. It's about how to get more space in your Google account. Like we've talked about in the past that...
Oh, go to eBay. Wasn't that your shortcut?
Well, that is the short to doing that. By the way, I did go on eBay as we were talking just to check, and you just type in Google and Unlimited. There's still hundreds of sellers of these accounts, which
and are those are enterprise education customers that somehow have an admin that's doing that? Is that...
Well, the one that I did. Well, actually, I've purchased two over time because it's an interesting dollar. It's an investment. It's a $1 investment to get a couple hours of interesting stuff in my life. But yeah, that and for all I know, it could be the kid hired on work study that has a little tech savvy and is trying to make a little money on the side, or part-time admin, or an angry admin on their way out that still has admin. I mean, there's literally thousands of scenarios here, right? This could be the case. But if you are stuck on a smaller account, or you're purchasing, let's say it's 100 gigs of space. I think I'm purchasing 200 gigs of space on my personal Google account every month. You may find out that you have a lot of cruft in your Google Drive that you just don't need anymore, right? And so this article from The Verge talks about how to go find files, but the reason why I'm mentioning this article is because they have a link in there that opens up your entire file load by size, and then you can rank them top to bottom. And as it turns out, I went onto my Google account when I saw this, my personal Google account, and I had 37 300 megabyte 300 megabyte sized files that were backups of text messages. I use a specific app to back up my text messages onto the cloud on the Android environment. I'm now on iCloud because I'm iOS guy again. So it's part of the iCloud account there, but these go back 4 years, and I was able to delete all but one of those. I kept the most recent one on there in case it's useful to me down the road, but these were huge files. So if you are starting to become more mindful of your cloud storage, this would be a way to look at your different options on Google in particular to find out what's taking up all of your storage.
And the one note I'd make on that with security in mind is remember to be really wary when you find links that are going to, and these look fine, and I clicked on it. I think it's legit. This is a legit source.
Yes.
But be really wary when you get a link that is going to then try to authenticate and log you in to do that, because in addition to pixel trackers being a huge problem, phishing, social engineering continuing to be. My geek of the week is Doodle for Google. There's a week left to have your students or whoever, I don't know if it might actually be age limited, but definitely kids in school can submit. And the theme is I am stronger because. The subtitle or the sub title of the heading is Strength isn't only about how fast you can run or how many push-ups you can do. It's also about the strength inside of you. And so I think that is a great prompt for our pandemic and the time that we're in. And Google Doodle for Google is pretty cool. I've heard different stories through the years of, teachers that have invited their students to submit, and anyway, they still have a week, and maybe you've got some kids who would like to do that. I'm going to share that with my students this week and encourage some of them who want to be more artistically inclined to think about putting in a submission.
Awesome. Okay. Well, Wes, we are at the top of the hour and a little bit extra to boot. Where can people find you on the internet?
I am W. Fryer on Twitter, and all of my sharing spaces are linked at wesfryer.com/after. How about you, Dr. Neiffer?
I am on Twitter at TechSavvyTeach. I also work with the Northwest Council for Computer Education, www.ncce.org. And if you haven't done so already, March 17th to 20th is NCCE's 50th anniversary conference. Special pricing ends at the end of February. So go to ncce.org/conference 2021 to find out more. But this podcast is a little bit about NCC tonight, at least. But we are the EdTech Situation Room. You can find us anywhere finer podcasts are aggregated. I have yet to find a new podcast app I'm experimenting with where you can't find our podcast. But even if you can't, go to our website, edtechsr.com, search for us on YouTube or on Facebook. You'll always be able to get video copies of the podcast. If you want to check out our links, go to our website, edtechsr.com/links, and you can check out everything we talk about, whether we get to it in the show or not. We are live every Wednesday night, except for once in a while when we go Thursday night or a bit little before after. Once in a while, we call it off for the week, but I would certainly encourage you to check us out live if you're available at 8 p.m. Mountain Time, 9 p.m. Central Time, sometime in the middle of the night UTC. We would love to have you live and hang out in our chat room. We hope you're staying safe with you and your families. We know it's cold out there, and not just like it's 35 cold, like really legit cold. Please stay safe out there, and we hope if you're in an area without power that you get power back soon and you're able to stay safe. Stay safe, stay savvy. We look forward to seeing you on the next episode of the EdTech Situation Room. Good night.